Renaissance artists, this is our second week of our Painting the Self-Portrait video lesson. In this week, we are going to begin blocking in the color and work on bringing the painting to a higher finish. So we're going to talk about mixing skin tones and laying in a little bit of fabric. I'm not going to go into too much of the hand, but I will show you a little bit of how I handled that. In part of this lesson of correction in the drawing, so you'll get to see some of that, how we tweak it as we go along. All right, so let's jump in. All right, as we move now into the second stage of the painting, I have the values in place, and I'm going to start by working on getting some of the background shaped around the head just a little bit more. And here in this stage, I'm just going through and refining some of my value sketches before I jump in on today's actual laying down of color. So I'm going back through and just tweaking a few areas that I thought needed a little bit more work and a little more definition. I'm also working here on building up the passage of the hair and getting it to have the solid structure underneath that it needs to support the skull. So working the hair around the face at the same time helps to build up the illusion of an actual skull under the head. In this passage, I'm working on just building up a little bit more of the highlights and skin tones around the face. Just getting a little bit of reality in the eye. That's just a highlight inside the iris. When the light is shining through from the opposite direction, it picks up on the inside of the iris, as if it were a bowl that's receiving the light on the inside of the rim. All right, now I'm going to check the measurements, and I'm taking the measurement from the top of my forehead to the top of the eyebrow. And then I'm measuring down from the eyebrow down to see where it hits on my nose. So I'm checking that eyebrow is correct right there. And then I'm going to calculate how far down that measurement is from my forehead, from the eyebrow down to where does it hit. And so I'm checking that it hits at the bottom of the nose. There's that measurement, and there it is. Now I'm taking it one step further to see where down below my face it hits as well. So there's the hairline measurement, making sure it's accurate, and there's that measurement, and then it's supposed to hit in the middle of my chin, and I needed a little bit more chin down below. So it's always good to allow yourself the freedom to go through and double check your corrections. There's nothing wrong with, as you're going along and something isn't setting right, to just double check, and don't get so precious with your painting that you can't just wipe out an area and start over. After all, it's oil paint and it's pretty forgiving. You can either scrape it off or paint right over the top of it if it's dried. So now I'm working on the highlights of the face. And again, I had mentioned working on planes last week. So I'm beginning by pulling out and clarifying the lightest plane, that lightest value. A little bit of yellow ochre, cadmium red, some alizarin crimson with that. Gives it a nice, cool, pinky skin tone for myself. That's pretty much, I'm very fair. And so I'm getting a little bit of that lightest value. The light hitting me is cooler, and the shadows are warmer. So I'm working on a little bit more of that alizarin, just on the highest lit places of the face first. I want to establish some anchors in that area. I also will be working on the cascade and movement of light down my face. So I want it most intense up there towards the corner of my eyebrow and my cheekbone. So I'll be working on pulling those out to be my lightest lights. And as the light fades down the face, it'll get darker and darker. If it doesn't, the skull doesn't have the feeling of it being shaped like a round ball. Now, the difficulty that I believe a lot of people run into with painting portraits, the same thing with anything in life, the longer you zero in and focus on something, the more you get obsessed about that particular thing. So if I were to look at my jawline and observe the color that I see it, it would appear a certain value. And if I painted it that way without taking the whole picture into perspective, I wouldn't notice the subtle shift in value from my cheekbone to the jawline. So you have to take the whole thing in and look at the brightest lights and the darkest darks when establishing all of those values in the middle area. Always be looking around at the big picture. So I'm working on some of these middle tone colors and values. A little bit more yellow ochre, some sienna in there, less of the brilliant white and cad reds. So getting some of that little more neutral tone as the light starts to hit it less back there by the ear and around on the lower portion, a little bit darker ultramarine blue, burnt sienna into the cavities of the eyes. That lit eye is not receiving the strongest dark shadows that, of course, the shadowed eye is. So even though I recognize that those are shadows, on the lit eye, it can't be as dark as the shadowed side. If you get your values too dark, it will have the appearance of being more concave than you mean for it to be. And likewise, if you get the values too light, there will appear to be lumps and bumps where you probably wouldn't want them. Getting my darker value here now, I'm just refining some of the drawing that might have got lost. Things do have a tendency to get smushy and just sort of fuzzy as you're working along. So make sure every now and then you go through and clarify your values and planes and your vision. Keeping it clean. All right, now I'm beginning the shadow of the lip color, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, little blue, little cad red light. And I will use a mixture of those. As the light hits it, I'll use a little bit more of the white, of course, and then as the shadow, on the shadowed side of the mouth, a little more blue and brown in there, just to keep it stronger, more sculpted feeling. Just take the time to really observe those angles and softness of the lips as you paint them. Make sure to not get anything too strong or sharp or contrasting. I wanted to highlight this area here where the mouth comes down. Underneath that lip are, of course, teeth, and that does a lot to define the shape of the mouth and the angle of it. As a viewer, we're very sensitive to what the mouth is telling us and the overall attitude of the painting. So I take a special moment toward the end and tuck in the corner of my mouth just a little bit more into the cheek, and it gives it the sense that I'm kind of smiling a little bit. I will show you more of that in the workbook. Definitely want to watch the overall attitude of your painting. As we're staring at our own faces, we can tend to get that resting face that just looks grumpy. So make sure that you take those extra precautions to maybe add the twinkle in the eye or the tuck of the lip to make you look pleasant. Okay, so I'm working now on capturing some of the redness at the tip of the nose. We all have more blood on the extremes of our face, chin, nose, ears. And so I'm adding a little bit more of the alizarin crimson and cadmium red light to the tip. It gives it that sense of reality too, and anything warm is going to come out at us. So the warmth of the nose makes it project off the flat surface of the face even more. So I really want you to take the time to get in there and observe your nose. At the top of the bridge of the nose, you have a stronger, sharper bone, and then as it comes down the bridge of the nose, it softens into shadow as it gets more fleshy and round and turns. So note where the bone drops off and the cartilage picks up, it gets softer, and then you have an angle there towards the front of the nose. And then down under the ball of the nose, there's subtle shifts in angles. So you can pull those out with the nostril and plane changes. They're teeny little planes on the end of the nose and throughout the construction of the nose as well. So take the time and observe your nose. Draw some sketches, get familiar with it. It will make a big difference. And you also want to note where the plane changes. You'll have a little highlight on the corner. So I'm going through here now and just picking up some of the bounced light into the shadows and pulling out some darker of the planes of the face where the shadow tucks in and around. Again, here, make sure that you don't go too dark It will alter the drawing. Even if your drawing is accurate, if you make the values too dark, it will still distort it. And one thing I want to call your attention to here is the softening of the edges and the jawline especially. The face is full of soft edges. You really don't want any sharp edge. The only places where you may want one is just right there where the chin comes in front of the neck. And it isn't even that sharp. It's not very crisp. The mouth has very soft edges, maybe on the bridge of the nose where it comes apart from the face. But it's not, again, it's not as sharp as you can get it. If you keep things too sharp and soft, it will definitely look illustrated, and you don't want that. Again, here's softening the contours of the lip, making it look like it's part of the face and not painted on. And you'll see I jump around throughout the painting. It keeps my vision fresh, and this is how you keep a total perspective of the whole face, by just jumping around and moving around and looking at all of the different elements as they work together to create the whole. Light is coming up inside the nostril from just the angle of the light and the tip of my head. Little details like that are important to pick up on if you want to really capture that the subtleties of your angles. All right, so now I'm working on what I would consider the second plane, and that's the middle tone values, where I've got the highlights in place. I've done a little bit of fussing around with some of the details, and now I'm getting back into the second plane, the one that's more horizontal, flatter, more perpendicular to us as the viewer, and that is just the middle tone range. I keep my brush strokes fairly horizontal in this, being cognizant of the topography of the face. So the highlights are getting hit by the light, and they are more on a parallel platform with our vision. And then the second plane that is horizontal is picking up less light. So being aware of what is going to be receiving more light and less light, and allowing my brush strokes to define the form in that manner. When painting the color of the cheeks, the rosiness of again, this is a passage of the face where you have more blood in your cheeks. This is why women wear blush. It gives you a youthful feeling. Be careful that you don't paint your cheeks too bright. It will look, again, painted on. As well as the contouring of the shadow of the cheek and under the zygomatic ridge. Don't allow that to get too dark. Just paint it. I painted a little bit darker than I needed, but then I come back through and lighten it a little, just to go too far so you can pull it back and see exactly where you need to be within that spectrum. And due to the fact that the highlights on that side of the face are very cool tone, the shift in warmth down in the cheek will give the illusion of it receding, because my shadows are warm on this portrait. So now I'm working again on the middle tone value as the cheek turns and goes under the jawline, so to speak, as opposed to compared to the highlight on the cheekbone. It tucks under, so I'm keeping the values darker and maybe a little more shadowy under that area. Now here I'm just going through and cleaning up some of the blotchier brush strokes that are causing a distraction for me. So coming through, it's a little like blending. There's smaller brush strokes that just help to define and keep my paint in the specific areas. I do go through and wipe my brush off fairly frequently because I don't want the colors to muddle and get muddy too much. So coming through here now with a darker tone, I'm gonna go back through and just sculpt out some more of the information around the hairline, a little bit more yellow ochre into that to create the color of my hair. Only you know the color of your hair, so you'll have to make those adjustments. But as I'm working around my face, I'm taking a little bit more blue and brown ochre, and I'm cognizant of the thinness of the hair as it approaches the skin and the different color that it picks up. It's not exactly the color of your hair because you have skin coming through it. So I'm just really observing where I have sharp edges and soft edges around the face hairline. Now it's going to make a big difference too to your painting once you start popping in these really dark, strong anchors in the hair and around the face. You can see how by putting that darker shadow behind my ear, it really set the hair back, pulled the neck out and the ear out, and started to sculpt in that form around the neck. Make sure that, as your hair is casting a shadow, if you have long hair, around your neck, that you observe the color of that shadow on your skin. My hair has a reddish tint, so it's casting a bit of a reddish glow onto the skin. So keeping that shadow soft, you want to more feel your shadows rather than observe them. And so that helps to cast that illusion, and keeping the edges very soft. Now the ear, you don't want to put a lot of time into fussing with the ear. It has to be accurate but simple. So I'm keeping it a fairly neutral value. The longer I stare at it, the more detail I see. And so what you want to make sure you do is, again, move around your painting. And as you're looking at other things that are more important, like the eyes or the frontal face, how much of the ear do you not see? And what you don't see, that's what you need to paint. So in this case, I'm really keeping it simple with just a few values, light, medium, a little dark, but that's it. I may go into a little bit more detail as it starts to shape up and I get toward the end of this painting. All right, so now I'm working on the second plane on the top of the forehead, just redefining the shape and contours that I saw up there that I really wanted to get that shape accurate. The more accurate you get your bone structure, the more it will look like you. Same thing with any kind of portrait that you're doing. That skull shape is extremely important. Everybody's skull is it's like a fingerprint. It has unique shapes and contours that really define and make out who that person is. So again, just getting that those shifts in the planes a little bit more accurate, and around the hairline too. That's going to give you more of that bone structure shape in there as well. Now I'm working on what I would call plane 3, the darkest planes of the face, where those planes turn and bend and go into shadow. On the forehead, you can see there's clearly the dark, medium, and light plane shifts. So I'm working on getting the darks in the rest of the face as well, a little bit more accurate. Highlights in the hair, again, set off the contours and the deeper shadows. I wasn't content with the shape of the hair. First of all, it'd be almost impossible to get that same hairstyle back again the second time I come back to sit. So I'm coming back through here with a more simple hairstyle that is more in keeping with how my hair normally looks. And I'm warming it up a little bit, burnt sienna, a little bit of ultramarine blue, and broader passages of simplified shape, which is good too because it's less distracting. Keeping the hair in a simplified, sculpted mass of dark, medium, and light will also give you the feeling of bulk, and definitely keep everything soft when painting the hair, unless there's just a few places where you need a strong, sharp highlight, like, for example, up there on my forehead or by my ear. Everything else needs to be very soft to have the illusion of hair. Don't think about the individual strands, but think about it as a mass, and everywhere that you can lose an edge, especially toward the background as your head turns and goes back. Lose and soften those edges. can take the opportunity at this moment too, as you're working on the hair, to refine some of the contours of the face. And here I'm cleaning up the passage around the neck and making the shadow on the front of the neck really recede back, keeping it in focus as it's more a part of the background than the foreground, which in this case would have more to do with the hair. So now I'm just coming back through and I'm taking the measurement of the face, the whole frontal face, from the top of the forehead down to the chin of my own, getting that measurement accurate, coming back over then to the painting, and I'm taking that measurement and I want to make sure that the rest of the painting all reads accurately. So I'm cleaning up these exact measurements and then making sure that the width of my, from shoulder to shoulder, as well as down to my hand, and all of those other passages of the painting are going to be working together accurately. So again, the measurement of the face. And it's funny because as you're doing this, you see your hand doing it in the mirror. And so you have two different things there you can look at. So make sure that you concentrate on your very real hand with the brush. So I took the measurement of the face, got that accurate, and now I want to see how wide I am. So I'm drawing an imaginary plumb line straight down from my eye, nose, mouth, and chin, straight down my chest to see where that plumb line would fall. And from that moment across, I took that measurement using the width of my face, or the length of my face. I would drew a line straight down in my mind, and then I went across to get that shoulder from the middle of my chest over to my shoulder. It was about one face length laying down. So that's what I'm working on here. And you can go through and make those marks just to double check all of your drawing. So now I'm spending the rest of this painting more or less working on the lower portion of the portrait. And I did say I would cover a little bit of this in the process of this painting the self-portrait, because personally I thought it'd be interesting to have my palette in there. And of course, if I have my palette, then I need my hand. And it poses a few other challenges as well. So if you are doing a self-portrait, and if this is your first self-portrait, I strongly encourage you just to focus on the face. But if you want to add more, I thought I would throw in a little bit more of, how to add the hand in and some of the clothing as well. So what I'm doing here then is I'm making my hair merge onto my shoulder. I had to have my shoulder in the accurate place before I could finish out the passage of the hair, just to confirm that it was all in the right place. So I'm using kind of a smaller brush. I should be using a bigger one, but it just happened to be what I had in my hand. So I'm keeping these passages where the light is hitting these soft and muted. I don't want to call a whole lot of attention to those areas where the light's doing its thing. In the meantime, I also need to work on the background at the same time as the hair, because the two are one, the hair and the background. Gotta keep those edges soft, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'll just take a few moments to darken in the shadow behind me. Where you have the light hitting the face, usually the background on the lit side is darker, and where you have the shadow side of the face, usually your background is lighter. Now, my hair creates that effect where it's lighter, so it makes the shadowed side of my face stand out more. And since my head is there and my image before me does not actually have a shadow behind me because it's just open air, I'm adding that to give my setting there a sense of being in a room. And now I'm working on the back area there on that side just to give it a sense of there's a wall and behind my head. All right, taking a little bit of alizarin crimson and some ultramarine blue, a little bit of sienna to keep it rich. I'm putting in some of the velvet sweater thing I'm wearing, blocking it in, not a whole lot of fussy detail on it. I don't want to draw the eye down there, but I want to create the sense that the fabric is there. So squinting down at my clothes, I'm just keeping it very, very simple. I'll come back through and add a few highlights and shadows and effects of velvet, but I'll do that later. All right, I jumped ahead here, and before I get into talking about the hand, I want to talk a little about that black in the background of my shirt. Very subtle shifts in black. Painting black can be quite a challenge. There's a lot of coolness to it, but the shadows are warm, as I mentioned in the course of my painting here. Cool, light, warm shadows. So I had to push that black a little bit lighter than what I originally thought it was. You know, you see black, you paint it black, but make sure to observe the subtle shifts in values. Same thing with painting my hand here. I worked on the drawing a bit, and I'm blocking in the values the same way that I did my face, starting with the strongest highlights. It's closer to the light than even my face because it's moving and it's a flatter surface, so it's getting a lot more light. My two fingers are extended, the ring finger's bent, and my pinky is kind of tucked under, so I'll be playing with some of those shifts as the knuckle of the top of the hand curves around and down under. And again, just keeping it very light and very loose at this moment too. Of being observant of the different subtle shifts in the bones and anatomy, tendons in the hand. I'll come back through here with a little more color and time and attention in the next video. But again, I won't be taking a whole lot of time in this study painting the hands, but I did want to show you, as a second-year student, a little more about painting hands. So the two fingers that are on top are a little more red on the knuckles. The ring finger and pinky have a little more purple as they are shifting down into cooler shadows. And so that's all I'm really focusing on in this video with this hand. And that pretty much sums up the extent of this video, and this is a close-up of how I ended the second stage. When your foundation is solid, then you are ready then to begin the detail, which is what we will do next week.